Hello and welcome back to Jack Knives Reviews. I'm of course your host, Jack Knives. As you could tell from my glasses, it is once again Valentine's Day. And with that, we look a little bit more into the romantic genre of films. In previous iterations, I've talked about dark romance, bromance, and talked about one of my favorite romantic movies. So I figure why not go back to basics and pick 5 movies that I feel would make a good date night or just a movie that you want to watch on a romantic feeling evening. Some of these movies I think may be better than others, but it's not necessarily a ranking list. So with that being said, these are my 5 date night movie picks. A girl named Amelie grows up sheltered by her worried father. As she becomes a woman, she decides to devote herself to helping others in finding their own happiness, and eventually finding her own in the process. Amelie is one of those movies that I feel is very hard to explain to someone unless you've seen it. It's a movie that simultaneously constantly gets referenced. You'll see the poster of Amelie in the backgrounds of movies or in the backgrounds of TV shows, or references to Amelie that may go over your head if you've never actually seen the movie. If I were to describe this movie in one word, it would be quirky. Audrey Tautou is such a show stealer. She is so sweet and kind and has this fun charm to her that is so hard to describe unless you've seen the movie. She just has this fun quirkiness to her that doesn't feel inorganic. And the part where she's breaking the fourth wall feel like she's a friend just opening up to you and just saying, hey, hope you're having a good time. And that is a comfort that a lot of films don't really get, especially ones that deal with the fourth wall breaks. Amelie herself is a very fun, loving, caring, kind person. She constantly gets into mischief, but not intentionally. Her motives are good, her interests are making everyone happy, and through that progression she starts to figure out what her own happiness is, which is where the romantic element comes in. Plus getting to see the aspects of Europe that most films don't really talk about specifically, that kind of gets swept under the rug, actually does add more gravity and more practicality to people that maybe have never been to Europe. But the main focus Amelie herself brings has this fun, happy charm that you can't help but smile at when you watch her. She has this kind of almost kid actor element to her where she's aware of her mischief, but not in a malice way, in more of a I got you kind of way, and I think that does add a lot of fun charm to the movie. It's a lighthearted romp that doesn't have too much of the romance, but has just enough to make your partners a little more on the happy side.
Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist.
Nick, a music lover, is desperately trying to get back with his ex, Triss. Through a series of events, a somewhat acquaintance of Triss named Nora runs into Nick. Throughout their show jumping and music taste, they both experience things that help them have a night they hope never ends. Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist is one of those movies that kind of came and went. It's not necessarily disliked or bad, because obviously it has somewhat of a following. It just, I think, gets overshadowed with other movies at the time, like Juno. And because of that, it just kind of swept under the rug. I constantly see the movie in pawn shops or discount movies, but honestly, it's one of those movies that I feel encapsulates what it means to be a teenager and still trying to figure yourself out. Holding on to older relationships, but not quite giving up at the same time. You're a little more on the uneasy side as to diving in. And through that relationship relatability of connection between another person, it could be something as simple as music, food, whatever. That little aspect kind of allows a connection that may or may not allow you to lower your guard. For better or for worse, I feel that it allows Nick and Nora to have a genuine, decent chemistry. I absolutely love Kat Dennings, and I really don't like Michael Cera, but I feel that their balance between each other's kind of quirky / sarcastic nature adds a fun dynamic to each other in a way that does remind me of a couple of couples I may know. It's a fun little movie that if you just pop on any date night, it will be worth your time. Toru's life is in flux when his best friend Kizuki ends his own life. Naoki, Kizuki's girlfriend, is just as devastated as he is, and in their grief they grow closer together. Over time though, Toru tries to get mentally better while Naoki keeps getting worse. With another woman named Midori in the picture, Toru has to figure out what he wants for his own future. I read Norwegian Wood, the book, and I absolutely loved it so much. I couldn't really put it down until I finished it. It's one of those stories that is heavy, but realistically heavy, because you have two people who are justified in their feelings of loss and kind of confiding in each other, which blossoms into a somewhat romance, and yet they're not really sure if the romance is justified, and because of that, they can never really give themselves to that. There are multiple people, I believe, that start relationships kind of on unlevel footing, but ultimately they do follow through. This movie kind of tackles that in a way that doesn't feel too forced. It doesn't feel inorganic. Kenichi Matsuyama has done so many productions that I've loved, including Gokusen, Linda Linda Linda, and the live-action Death Note movies as L. He brings this realism to the performance of a person who's not really sure how he feels. A feeling of, am I being selfish? Am I taking advantage? Am I actually in love? Am I just grasping at straws? And that balance of the relationship and chemistry is bounced off by Rinko Kikuchi, who has this stoic sadness to her that feels so sincere. We've all felt the loss of a loved one, but when you've felt the loss of a loved one you were romantically involved with, it hits much harder because you have this regret of, what could I have said or what could I have done to change the course of actions? And that same mindset is also what the main character deals with regards to her. And their chemistry bounces off each other. On a side note, if you haven't seen Tokyo Vice, Rinko Kikuchi is fantastic in it. But the story feels like a heavy topic that may or may not be everyone's cup of tea. But if you want a good romantic drama that tackles the subject of unsuredness in a relationship, Norwegian Wood is probably one of the best examples of pulling it off perfectly without feeling too forced. And it will keep you invested from beginning to end, if you give it the opportunity to. Off the coast of New England, two 12-year-old pen pals, awkward and nerdy Sam and popular pretty Susie, fall in love with each other. As people search for the two, they try to figure out what it means to be in a relationship, all while a massive storm is on the horizon, jeopardizing everything. Little bit of a confession here. I don't really like Wes Anderson as a filmmaker. Now, I know a lot of people do, but I feel that the problem I have with him is everything seems too clean. It's pretty much if OCD were a film. Every movie is hyper symmetrical, is hyper clean, hyper crisp. It doesn't feel real. Everything feels like a dollhouse, and everything feels like ungenuine, I guess. It feels like someone playing with dolls. But that out of the way, Moonrise Kingdom is a perfect example of taking that concept of feeling like a play and also being genuinely sweet and cute. It having parts that, when you're young and you start to develop the concept of feelings, of romance, you're not really sure what you're feeling, but you know you're feeling it strongly because you're so young. And this is a movie that deals with it on a fairly real level, despite, again, the visuals contradicting the realness of it. The cast is full of great actors like Edward Norton, Tilda Swinton, Bill Murray, the usual people that are in Wes Anderson's productions. But Jared Gilman and Kara Hayward carry this movie. They're so genuine and awkward and fun to watch in a way that you feel almost like a parent seeing their young kid develop their first crush and try to figure out what that means. Fun and sad, but also cute in a weird way. I can't really explain it too well without giving too much away, but the parts where it's just those two together are a perfect balance of awkwardness and cuteness and funny. It's just got a little bit of everything. Much like young kids developing their own feelings of what is romance, what is it to be with someone. This movie does encapsulate that pretty dang well, and I like that it does so in a way that kind of just makes you giggle and laugh when you watch it. And I think it's one of those movies that, if you're a couple, you'll get a kick out of. In the 80s, legendary artist of the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, is constantly under watch from his doctor, who keeps him sedated and unable to truly enjoy his life. He meets a beautiful woman named Melinda who wants to help him both in his current state and to finally face his own past traumas, for a future together full of love and mercy. Before I went in to go see Love and Mercy, I thought it was just going to be a Brian Wilson biopic. An artist who I think is one of the greatest of all time, finally getting his dues in an aspect that talks about his life. But it's more than that. With biopics, it generally overinflates, it focuses too much on too many things because there's specific notes they have to talk about, especially when music careers are involved. It focuses on one aspect and one aspect only. Telling the story of a man, telling the story of his experiences, and understanding what he went through and why he needed to be saved. Because the people around him were drowning him. Because he was drowning himself. He needed one person to show him what that meant to be saved. The central focus of the movie is not about the Beach Boys. It is actually about Brian Wilson and his trauma, his experiences, the things he went through. And it does it in a way that feels legitimately good. Because when you see what he goes through, you see how much pain he's been through, you feel for him. When it switches between Paul Dano as young Brian Wilson and John Cusack as older Brian Wilson, it feels like the same person, even though they look nothing alike. This is the best performance Elizabeth Banks has ever done. And for as kind and caring as Melinda is, Dr. Levy, played by Paul Giamatti, is that much more of a vicious, horrible person. And you see him take advantage of a person who is vulnerable. And it really breaks your heart to see him like that. But that's really why he needed to be saved. Seeing how Brian Wilson and Melinda Ledbetter got together, it's very much that story of she did save him. She helped him in a way that didn't feel forced. She wasn't his Superman, but she was as close to it as it was. And considering the person who helped make this movie was Brian Wilson himself, it's from his own mind, his own experience, that we see what he went through. The movie title, Love and Mercy, is not just a song that Brian Wilson wrote. It's a true statement of the thing that he experienced that he never got to until he met Melinda. A concept of love and mercy. A concept of accepting your faults and your trauma and what you went through, and that it's not your fault. I do believe it's one of the best romantic movies and one of the best biopics because it allows a great story about a great person. Also, what it means for one person to be loving enough to help them. So those are my 5 picks. Are there any that you would recommend? Let me know in the comments down below. Have a happy Valentine's Day, and I'll see you next time.